That one's on. There we go, we've got him. Well, the sun is shining. It's a beautiful spring morning. I'm here at Larford Lakes where we're going to be tackling Match Lake. Now, I'm going to be using a bait today that lots and lots of people tend to use on the pole quite regularly. However, they kind of overlook that there are scenarios when we can actually use it when we're feeder fishing, and that's exactly what I'm going to be using today. Now, in order to get the best out of this session, I'm just going to be keeping it really simple. I'm just going to be setting up one rod, one reel, and I'm going to be showing you how I'm going to prepare the bait for this session. There's one or two fish moving. I've got a feeling we're going to catch some fish short, and that's really what I'm going to be focusing on. So I'm going to get set up, get the rod out there. Hopefully there's going to be a few fish waiting for us, and I'll talk you through how I prepare the bait and how I actually fish this method, which can, to be quite honest, be absolutely devastating going right the way through summer. Well, the conditions look absolutely ideal. The sun's out, we've got a little bit of a ripple on it as well from the right and in. It looks perfect. So I'm just going to get a feeder out there because I'm sure we're going to start getting indications straight away, albeit from small fish, but let's get this out there. I just dropped that even closer that time, thinking they were in that really shallow water. I dropped it much closer that time. I've scaled down in the feeder. As you can see, it's a pristine little bream. But that was from the really shallow water. That was literally about 4 meters out. There are fish cruising about on the top, you know, there are obviously in the shallow water, which isn't ideal for feeder fishing, but that might have just highlighted what kind of a depth the fish might be in. It's not the target species, but it's very welcome. We're off the mark. Been fishing about 10 minutes. Like I say, I'm getting loads of indications. There are fish there, I'm getting line bites. As we know, depth can be a big issue. So I'm just going to focus on that spot now to see if they are actually in that shallower water. Well, it looks like the bream are on it anyway. Well, it's not the target species, but to be fair, I'm not really seeing any fish getting caught around this lake at the moment. So it's nice to be putting something in the net. That's a bit bigger, that one. Covered in the bumps there, getting ready for spawning. Nice fish to catch when you're not catching the F1s and carp, but just hooked in the corner of its mouth. So yeah, the bream are on it. So we're just going to see if we can find one or two carp and F1s. When I first get to my peg, that is when I would prepare this bait. So before I start setting the box up and everything, this is the first thing that I would do. Now, ground bait choice, I'm going for F1 Dark today. I'm a massive fan of the F1 range. I love the F1 Green. However, today I'm going to use the Dark. Not purely because the water clarity is clear by any means. I just want to see what kind of an effect we're going to have using this Dark mix. Okay, so the first thing I would do before I actually mix the ground bait is soak the pellets. Now here you've got to use fishery pellets. So these are fishery micros, and all I basically do initially is I soak the pellets down. We can't go by set times anymore, you know, it's not 1 minute per mil or anything like that like we're used to. It really is trial and error, unfortunately, because batches of pellets do change. So what I'm going to do is, because these are fishery pellets, I'm not sure how long to soak these for initially, so I'm just going to give them 2 minutes and then see how they go. If they're alright, obviously I can drain the water off then and see how they are, but if they still haven't had enough time, then obviously I can add more water to them. And the reason why I do this first is because I love to use the water from these pellets to mix my ground bait with. So they've been soaking now for 2 minutes, so all I'm going to do is drain that water into a bait tub, and that just means that the water that I'm mixing my ground bait with is absolutely loaded with the smell of these fishery pellets. It's just one way of giving your mix an added boost and an added edge, and it is obviously with the actual fishery pellets, so they're the pellets that they see the most of. So there's our water. I'm going to mix a kilo, which in this case is half a bag, because these are 2 kilo bags. So I could just pinch the bag halfway down and tip that in. That's just one way of just making sure you know how much you're mixing. Lovely and dark this mix, but I do this right at the start as soon as I get to my peg, because then it's going to get a good hour or so to rest, so that by the time I'm ready to start the session, this mix will be ready. Now, as regards actually preparing the meat, I don't really do anything fancy. This is not a fancy tin of meat. It's not flavoured. It's not from a tattle shop. It's just from the supermarket. So I just prefer the just natural meat flavour. Once I've got the tin, I then cut it up into slices, and what I'll do then is I'll put 2 to one side, and they're the ones that I'm going to be using for the actual hook bait itself, and the other 3 slices in this case are the ones that I'm going to be introducing into the swim within the ground bait itself. Now, once they're actually in strips, there are 2 ways that you can prepare it, or 2 ways that I often prepare it. One is I quite simply get the sections of meat and push them through a sieve. Okay, in this case it's the 4mm matrix sieve, and by pushing that through you end up with little tiny cubes of meat that you can introduce into your ground bait, which is going to obviously give them a flavour for the meat, but then obviously your hook bait is going to be in the middle of that, and that is the much bigger either 4, 6 or even 8mm punched meat in the middle, where hopefully they're going to pick yours out really quickly. And the other way of doing it is quite simply to just grate the meat. Some people use just a normal kitchen grater that you would use for vegetables or something like that, and you can actually grate it and put it into your mix that way, and there's no real big science to it. It's just a case of introducing some loose offerings to give that flavour of the meat, to give them a taster, where hopefully once they get drawn into that, they're going to pick out your much chunkier hook bait. Well, it's clear to see that there are loads of skimmers out there, and the odd better bream as well. I'm getting indications all the time there are fish coming to that ground bait. They're obviously feeding there, but I think there's so many small fish there coming into that ground bait. It's showing that maybe there aren't any F1s or carp there just yet on that feed, so it's going to be all about that last 90 minutes now. We've caught plenty of skimmers, but they're not the target. We're after carp and F1s if we can get them. So this last 90 minutes I'm going to set up this margin now just down the front edge of this grass, where we expect some fish to naturally start coming into these margins anyway like they do normally. But I'm going to put a couple of feederfuls of bait there, set it up, leave it, give it a good 20 minutes, half hour before I go on it, and then hopefully when we drop on that with exactly the same rig, the same setup, everything, same bait, but down this margin, where hopefully we're going to get some better fish at the latter part of the session. So all I can do, because this is a fixed elasticated stem feeder, I can simply unclip it, put a cage feeder on, and then I can feed down this margin and just set it up. I'm gonna give it half an hour. I'll give it 30 minutes, so I'm gonna put 2 of these in, give it 30 minutes. We might see fish down there anyway because it is such shallow water. I'm just gonna set that up where hopefully there'll be some on that in 30 minutes when we drop on it with exactly the same setup and same bait. Well, these bream are relentless. They actually love the meat. I know there are lots of people who fish for skimmers on commercials with meat. It looks like it's definitely top of their menu today. But if it was a match at least you'll be putting some fish in the net, some weight in the net whilst you're waiting for carp o'clock when we go down this margin. Well, we're into the last 90 minutes. I must have caught probably 15 or 20 of those bream now. Lots of little indications. However, it's time to target this margin. It's obvious today that the bream are really enjoying that meat, but I'm pretty sure that we're going to catch one or two better fish down this left-hand margin. I put 2 feederfuls of bait in on it initially, just to get it going, and that's it. I've not done anything else to it, so I'm going to be dropping on this now again. I'm going to go on with an 8mm piece of punched meat with some of that ground bait in the feeder, some of that mix that we've got, some of those 3 bits of meat, and hopefully there'll be 1 or 2 waiting for us. Those ducks might be a little bit of a nuisance, but let's have a drop down there. I've just moved my feeder arm further to the right, so I've got a much better angle on the tip. So if I'm going to hook anything, obviously there's still a nice angle, so that it is, you know, as the fish runs out the peg, the rod is actually going to be able to cushion the power of the fish. So let's see if there's anything down there waiting for us. Only got a small feeder on there. It's a 20 gram inter size open method feeder. That's because obviously I've been feeding down there, and if there is anything there, then we don't want to go scaring it, do we, by crashing a big feeder in. That's it, we set the trap. The time of day is right. We've still got a ripple on it. There's all this grass here. It looks ideal. I haven't seen any fish down there. Usually in shallow water you can see fish there if they are there, especially if they are obviously bigger carp. But everything's set now, so let's see how we get on with this. I don't think I'm going to need to change from an 8mm piece of meat. I think that's just going to be the right size, because F1s can pick that up as well if there are going to be any F1s there. But let's see what happens. Even if they don't want this meat or whatever, even if, you know, they're not interested, if they're there, we should get line bites. They should give themselves away, and if that's the case, then I might just need to ring 1 or 2 little changes. There we go. I've got a funny feeling this is going to be a bream. What is that? A roach hybrid? There we go. We are now fishing for roach now. There we go. Meat again, an 8mm piece of meat. That's not a great sign, is it? It was a good pull though. We'll persevere with it. Yeah, that one's on. Well, that one's just shot straight out into the middle of the lake. There's no question that this one's certainly not a bream. I just saw a couple of tails just coming up. I mean, it's really shallow there where I'm feeding just there, but this one just shot out of the peg. That's obviously why you've got to have your drag set, so that these fish can just power off out of the peg. But yeah, it feels a good fish, this one. This is only the XRC 9-foot rod that I'm using, but it's beautiful for this sort of fishing, especially at such short range. All we've got to do now is try and make sure we land him. But yeah, that was on the 8mm piece of meat. Like I say, I mean, we haven't caught any F1s or carp out there the first part of the session, but I'm absolutely sure that that's just down to the time of day and the way that we're fishing. I'm sure if we were fishing shallow or pinging pellets, then those carp are up in the water, and so obviously this time of day is when they're still in that shallow water, but they're obviously the time of day they just naturally start to come down these margins. So it looks like when we do get one, it looks like it is going to be a good fish. There we go, we've got him. Bit of a shuffle. That's what you expect down these margins. Proper fish. And that's how you can rack up big weights late on in matches, when those sorts of fish turn up. Well, that was another good pull, but this one was much slower, this one. This one didn't race out into the middle of the lake like the last one. Feels a heavy fish, he's just not fighting that much. That can happen sometimes with these shorter, softer rods. It's almost as though sometimes the fish don't, I don't know, because you're not giving them loads of power, because you're using a softer rod. It's amazing how they don't run off. Well, that one virtually went straight round again. It was only in there probably about a minute, and it's another proper carp as well. Really nailing it now. They're obviously waiting for it going in. That little feeder, it's just an intersize open method feeder. You're not introducing too much bait, you know, and it's just because it's so small. When the fish comes in, it's literally a mouthful, and that's right where your hook bait is. That's a big fish. Bit of a shuffle. He's the heaviest one so far. There we go, that's what it's all about. Well, this one's really angry. In fact, you just seen it break the surface there. This was almost instant. It was literally only in about 30 seconds, if that. So they home straight in on it. So they're obviously getting a taster for that meat now. Obviously, you know, you've got to say that the time of day as well is a lot to do with it. But that's why you don't target these margins till later on, you know. And especially when the fish are this sort of size, there's no point in rushing it, you know, because you don't need many fish for a good weight. Again, it's another good fish. There we go, got him. Well, it's just showing that by targeting certain areas of the swim at certain times, you can get the most out of it. As you know, we didn't catch any carp early on, but we were catching bream, so we were still putting weight in the net, and that was all with the same setup and same bait. Another pretty fish. It's got loads of energy, this one. He's not going to let me pick him up, I'm sure. There we go. Fantastic way of fishing. Well, that just goes to show that, you know, you don't need to spend loads of money on bait. I've had 1 tin of meat today and just 1 kilo of ground bait, and to be honest, I've probably got half of that ground bait left. We've had a great day catching bream early on, and then this just goes to show that, you know, you can single out those bigger carp at certain times of the day in certain areas of your swim. We haven't had any F1s, so it has very much been a day for the big carp later on. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up, and I look forward to seeing you next time.